This is the 8th of June, 2021, for Ancient and Medieval History. We're going to start with some basic announcements. First off, do any of you have your textbooks with you now? If you do, raise your hand. Okay, I see one. Please take the cover off and bring it up here. I will sign it in, and you will get homework credit for returning it. Do any of you have your books in your lockers? If you do, you can bring them back. Okay, give me a second to find your name. You can come up. Just be patient with me. And Flores, you should have 16-151. It should be on the, look at the front edge. The front edge, right?
I'm blind.
There you go.
Yes.
16-150. Okay, show it to me. Okay, it's in decent shape. Put it in the pile, please, with the number facing out like all the others. So, Zoe is going to get homework credit for today. Thank you. Now, the rest of you, I expect the book turned in by Friday 3... I'm sorry. No! I'm not being here Friday. By Thursday, 3 p.m. So, before Thursday, 3 p.m., turn in your book. You get an A-plus homework grade on your fourth quarter. That's nice. Any other books that you owe me that you signed out for my classroom library, I want them back too. Any work that you want to get credit for, I want in before 3 p.m. Thursday. If it comes in later than that, I'm not even going to check it. So it's got to be in. That's a hard deadline, 3 p.m. Thursday. If your textbook does not come in by 3 p.m. Thursday, you'll have a 0 for a homework grade. That will hurt your fourth quarter grade. If you get it in next week, you'll have somewhere between a 50 and a 60. I haven't decided yet. It'll be a mid-range grade. It'll mildly harm your grade. I want them in by 3 p.m. Thursday. Any questions about that? Yeah.
Are we going to have a test this week?
I'll be explaining that in a moment. Okay, so the textbook thing should be clear. Any late work or any owed work or any extra credit work should be in by then. Second, what I'm planning on doing this week is talking more about the high and late Middle Ages until I'm done on Thursday afternoon. Now, the reason I am doing this is, first of all, a happy one. Because of the nutsiness of this year, I never thought that I would get as far as we have. I was afraid we'd get stuck earlier.
Dr. LeBlanc's doing wrong version.
Oh, okay.
So if you hear shrieks,
that's fine.
Don't worry.
Well, it is French after all.
The shrieks
One
are
expects
normal.
a certain amount of horror. So, I'll be talking about the Middle Ages until I conclude the lessons. I realize that this part of things is being done fairly quickly. Not as quickly as my European history kids, though. What's going to happen then next week is you're going to be taking 2 exams. You'll be taking a unit exam on the High and Late Middle Ages, on everything we've covered since the Dark Ages exam. And you'll be taking the final. The final will be about 80% second semester, or 20% first semester. And I'm not giving you a study guide. The exams that I've given you are what I build my tests out of. So study the exams I've given you. The only exception may be the stuff that I'm teaching you now, because you're not going to have access to the unit exam. I'm still working this out, but I might give you a study guide of just the stuff in the High and Late Middle Ages that we're covering, just so you have them. I'm not sure yet. I'll think about it. But my plan is for you to take both of those exams with enough time to correct the unit exam and the final. Now, you're not able to improve the final in a moment. You are able to improve the unit exam. So if you get done with both exams, if we do the corrections together, you can rewrite wrong answers on the last unit exam, but not on the final. And if you get it done in class, fine. If you want to come back later today, study lab, whatever, you can do that. We'll work it out. Question?
So we have the unit test for this stuff.
Yes.
Will this stuff also be on the final along with you?
Maybe. I haven't decided yet. If it is, it should be a double shot of goodness if you know your stuff. I haven't decided yet.
Okay.
I haven't written a thing yet. Now, the form the test will take is likely the same form as my midterm and as the other exams you've taken, which favor matching. There may be some multiple choice from the Baker worksheets, but for the most part, or the Baker quizzes, but for the most part, it's going to be my own. And my tests, I think, are pretty darn easy and straightforward if you're paying attention. So bear that in mind. Maybe I'm wrong. Other questions?
So if we want to do corrections for the unit exam and we don't have enough time in the day,
You can come back before the end of finals and do them.
Could we do it for a small bit after school?
A small bit after school, yeah. If you have arrived. Any other questions, comments, or thoughts on this bread and butter stuff before we go into the lesson of the day? I see none. Good. Where we were was the universities. Scientas potentatus est. Scientas, knowledge. Potentatus est. Now, does anyone want to translate that? Scientas potentatus est. Don't make Mr. Williams cry. Okay. Knowledge is power! Is that what you were going to say?
Yes.
Because it's right. Knowledge is power. And the universities that secularize knowledge, the universities that are increasingly controlled by laymen who are scholars, who have their robes and their guild-like systems and their research, ultimately are going to form the basis of the people who, in early modern times, are going to engage in the scientific revolution. In fact, arguably, the groundwork of what will later be called the scientific revolution is established as early as the late Middle Ages. So let's look at some of this. Alchemy is what leads to chemistry. But alchemy deals with the transmutation of matter. The notion that you can take two substances that have great similitude and alter them into one another. The most common thing is the use of what Harry Potter looked for, the Philosopher's Stone, not the Sorcerer's Stone. Harry Potter was originally, number one, first book, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. But when they went to publish in the United States, the publisher thought, oh, stupid Americans won't understand the Philosopher's Stone. Let's just call it the Sorcerer's Stone, eh? And I think they did that for Canadians as well, which is why I just gave you a Canadian accent. Actually, I just lapsed into that. So we have Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, but really it's the Philosopher's Stone. The Philosopher's Stone is a nearly mystical, magical device and element that can be used to turn a soft, yucky, gray metal into a beautiful, shiny, golden metal. Turning lead into gold. Lead and gold, very similar. They're about as soft as each other. They can be worked in similar ways. They're about the same weight. Lead and gold are both very heavy. You get a handful of lead or gold, it's going to be very hard for you to hold it up with your hand. If you have a handful of gold, you have a lot of good that you can do with that, because that's a lot of value. Unfortunately, at least as far as the official history of the world is concerned, which I believe, nobody ever figured out how to do that. Because there is a fundamental flaw with the notion behind alchemy, and that is that you can transmute elements. What did you learn in chemistry, if anything, yet, about elements? Do any of you have any notion of what elements are in chemistry and how they get on the periodic table? You haven't taken chemistry yet.
No, we're in physical science.
You're so stupid. Only stupid people have never. I've never taken
I think we're
chemistry.
taking chemistry next.
I've never taken chemistry. I'm joking. Okay. He called us stupid because we didn't take a course we're not going to take until next year. I'm joking. I'm a bad joker, but it is my attempt at humor. So that is the move the blanket gesture. Okay. Can you change elements? According to every chemistry teacher and textbook I've ever encountered, and again, I didn't take the class, so you'll learn more about chemistry than I know by a few months in next year. No, you can't. Elements are what they are. What makes them elements on the periodic table is that they can't be transmuted. Now, the medieval concept comes from an ancient idea that there are 4 elements. Earth, do any of you know them?
Water.
Yes. Water, earth, fire, and air. Earth, Wind, and Fire was a disco band from the 70s.
Yeah, I know.
But still, they get close. Earth, Wind, and Fire. They just, wait. Yeah, they don't have water. What's wrong with that?
I don't have water.
They don't have water. No. In any case, earth, water, fire, and air are the 4 elements that people in ancient medieval times believe everything is composed of. So, for example, we have more fire in us than, say, sheep, because we have an intelligence, and that's a spark of fire. But and we have more water in us than, say, a tree. A tree has more earth in it than we do. A rock is almost totally earth. Different types of rocks have different trace elements of the other 3. So in a world where everything is composed of earth, water, air, and fire, everything is transmutable, because everything can be reducible to earth, water, fire, and air. But our periodic table of elements has water on it. H2O, I think, is an element on the periodic table.
No.
No?
It's a combination.
It's hydrogen and oxygen.
Hydrogen and see, you already know more than I do. So hydrogen and oxygen, which are indissoluble elements, come together to form water. In fact, do any of you know what the proportion is? It said just now.
H2O.
So what is 2? Hydrogen or oxygen?
Hydrogen.
Is it 2 hydrogen and 1 oxy, or
Yeah.
1 oxygen?
2
Two
hydro,
hydrogen, 1
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Hydrogen, 1
I'll take your
oxygen,
word
anything
for it.
else.
I'll take your word for it. But-
H2.
Yeah.
Oh, nothing.
So what is salt? Do any of you know the label for salt? NaCl. Very good. Very good. So we develop an understanding of chemistry from medieval alchemy, because they do all sorts of experiments to try to figure out things. But what we would call science isn't fully there yet, because what makes our science science is empiricism. Now, empiricism is a word. It means something that's measurable, something that is tangible enough to be measured. So, can you count it? Can you weigh it? Can you see how long, how wide, how tall it is? How much water it displaces? Is it ignitable? Is it something that you can dissolve in acid? How does it react to water? All of these things you can experiment with. What about its spirit? Does it have a masculine or a feminine air? Does it have the spirit of animals or plant? Can you put a soul in it, like a soul gem in a game? What is the purpose of mind? What is the power of thought? Can we communicate without words, mind to mind? Is there an ether that we can shape? See, what I've done is I've gone from measurable stuff to immeasurable stuff, because question of brain, our science can address. Questions of mind, it cannot. Why? Because the brain is the physical matter that our mind is based in. But our mind, if you want to call it that, is the pattern and matrix and lattice work of electronic impulses that are flying around our brain while it's alive. Our mind is more than the sum total of the brain's parts. Our mind is something special. There are lots of things with brains that don't have minds. In other words, they're not self-aware, they're not sentient. Science was still called natural philosophy, which is a term you should know. Natural philosophy. And natural philosophy assumed that there were many things in this universe that we can never measure, that we can never count, that we cannot quantify, that we cannot survey, that we cannot analyze. No. In fact, there are many things that are mystical, that are spiritual, that are something that you have to take on faith. You have to observe its effects. You have to observe its effects on the world. You can only assess their presence indirectly. It is the stripping away of this intangible stuff, of this unempirical stuff, that is the difference between natural philosophy as it was then and science as it is now. And there's a limit to this. There's a limit to this. Because our science is rooted in that which we can measure, it cannot even begin to talk about certain things, because there are no ways to measure it. So psychiatry, for example, is something that is a very difficult form of science to practice. Psychiatry, as opposed to psychology, is the study of the brain. Psychiatry is something rooted in the use of drugs, of medical procedures, in order to deal with mental illness. But since psychiatry cannot deal with the elements of what I call the mind, except as a phenomenon that has to be accepted as there, but that cannot be quantified, psychiatry still, and psychology much more, has an element of the witch doctor. Basically, if you can convince your patient of thinking a certain way, you might be able to do something with that patient. That's why psychologists are often called shrinks or head shrinkers, from the headhunter tribes of the Pacific that would take a head of one of their enemies and through chemical processes shrink the head down to pouch size. And you'd walk around with the head of your enemies in a pouch, the dried, desiccated, shrunken skull of the head. Head shrinkers, psychologists, deal with scientific principles, but ultimately these scientific principles have to be compromised with pseudoscience, which is mystical notions of the mind and the brain. I hope you're following what I'm saying, because alchemy works, bless you, if you accept the existence of the mind and the soul, even if they can't be measured. Take those away, and you are limited to only studying certain phenomena. And that is one of the limits of our science. It's also one of the joys of our science. It does lead to atomic power, space travel, the computers, and all the rest, modern medicine. It starts with alchemy and mysticism. Mysticism is the spiritual orientation of thought. In other words, the belief in things like the soul, the mind, elemental powers, that sort of thing. Any questions so far? If you're not understanding, you really should ask. You don't have to if you do understand. Okay, I'm just a really good teacher. So now, there's a fellow who in medieval times is called the father of Christian white magic. His name is Albertus Magnus. He's a Catholic saint. He's not a saint. He is a hero of medieval Catholicism, though. Albertus Magnus gathered all sorts of folk remedies and mystical signs, like hex signs that you see on Dutch farmhouses and barns sometimes. The kind of things that say that garlic repels vampire and wolfsbane repels werewolves and silver is proof against both. And he put this knowledge to use. There's a book called The Big Albert, Albertus Magnus, that deals with some of this. So you have a revered Christian theologian and thinker, Albert the Great, who deals in white magic at the university level. This shows you how different things were then. Paracelsus comes up with notions about where life comes from. Paracelsus leads a group, a movement within biology and medical science that is about, well, among other things, exhuming bodies of the recently dead. Why would this be controversial? From a scientific point of view, if you're going to understand human beings, you need to cut them open and look at what's inside and see how different things can be inside depending upon what different diseases they have. You try getting a live person, though, to go along with that. Psst, those silly people, they don't want to get cut open. What's wrong with them? Don't laugh. No, don't give me anything that indicates that you are even amused at my notion that a scientist would be put out that live human beings don't allow themselves to be used as lab specimens, for the most part. So, digging up the recently dead is about as close as you're going to get. But this is controversial, because it's not just a cadaver, it's Uncle Paul. And Uncle Paul is beloved. And what are you doing to Uncle Paul? You're violating the corpse. You're cutting it open. You're taking organs out. You're examining them. You're sniffing them. You're looking at them for what oozes out. You're treating Uncle Paul like you treat an animal at the slaughter. You're not treating him with respect. What if there is resurrection in the body, which is a doctrine many Christians at that time believe in? Many Christians today believe in it. The idea is that you and your body are restored. But if you divide the body like that, you're causing problems to the possible resurrection of Uncle Paul. That's a difficulty. So Paracelsus is ultimately banned. A lot of these studies deal with the bases of what we would call mythological horror, like The Walking Dead. Do you know what the basis of that legend is? Of zombies, ghouls, and others?
I was gonna say zombie. But...
Yeah. Yes.
I was gonna say that I think it's basically where the word zombies is.
Haitian voodoo priests can kill somebody mostly with a set of chemicals that simulates death. So the person seems to die and is buried, but they're not really dead. They rise from the grave. Their higher motor functions, their higher brain functions, should I say, have been burned out by this drug. They are suggestible and susceptible to suggestion. And they're smelly because they're rotting, they are dying. It's a nasty thing. But there is actually a chemical process in Haiti that is the basis for the zombie myth. Yes?
No, this isn't. I mean, this is kind of on topic, but so Jeffrey Dahmer, the serial killer.
Yeah.
With all his kills, what he was trying to do was create like his own little league of zombies. So he's like, I'm not gonna explain it, but like,
Yeah.
he thought that he could make them to zombies. So he'd like torture them to the point. Yeah, it's.
Well, no, but that's, mental. Somebody who's bat nuts, crazy, and evil is going to have a purpose in mind. And that makes sense. I actually never knew that because I've never studied him. But that makes sense. He wants to be a necromancer. A necromancer is a wizard who raises the dead and does their work. By the way, science doesn't really have the formula of the Haitian voodoo priest, so it's semi-mythological. But that is my belief, that there is a basis of it, in fact. Yeah.
It's my question whether or not it was actually done.
We don't know exactly yet. Yeah, there's some interesting. There are some. No, you can't buy it. Yes,
Makes me worried.
I heard that it has pufferfish.
it could, because that's paralytic.
Yeah.
Pufferfish venom is paralytic, and you are sort of paralyzing the. It's creepy stuff. Actually, there's a medical condition that doesn't involve any Haitian priests or chemicals that simulates death. People die. They seem to die. You can't hear a heartbeat. You can't feel a pulse. You can't feel breath. Their skin gets cool. They seem, to all intents and purposes, dead. So you bury them. They're not really dead. For some reason, their system has been slowed down to the point where their heartbeat is slowed, their breathing is slowed, and then they wake up, buried in the grave, maybe with brain damage because their brain hasn't gotten enough oxygen. So they fight their way out of their grave. You may walk by a graveyard and hear somebody struggling under the ground. Get me out of here, which is just a horror show. And maybe they break out and dig their way out with their bare hands. So they come out of the grave, they dig their way out of the ground looking like some kind of ghoul, and then they go home. I wasn't really dead. And people are going, ah! Because this person has just been buried, and they come back looking like they spent a weekend in hell. They were dead. This premature burial and the fear of being buried, I think we've talked about this before. The Victorians, if they were wealthy, had a little system set up so that if you woke up inside your grave, you could pull a chain and there'd be a foghorn that would go off. Boom. And people would know that you're alive in your grave and they'd come dig you out. People were really afraid of this. The Zoroastrians and the Buddhists of Tibet, when a person dies, slices up the body and tosses the body to the dogs to make sure that that never happens, because they've encountered people who've, quote, risen from the grave. Yes?
In some places in Europe, actually, like in the 1800s, they put a window on the grave so you could actually look in and see that dead person in case they weren't dead, and they'd be like, help.
Yeah.
That's weird.
And believe me, part of me wants that. It's not a happy idea to be trapped in your own grave. That's some scary stuff. So the university's natural philosophers would study stuff like this. And so you would have stories of the Walking Dead, of vampires. There's actually a blood condition that makes you hungry for human blood, or for any kind of blood, really. You have iron loss. You need something. Blood satisfies the thirst. So there are actually people who have been discovered by science who have a craving, an insatiable almost craving for blood, because their blood lacks certain elements that healthy blood needs. Werewolves. During the hungry times in Europe, people starved. Now, they starved normally twice a year anyway for a couple of weeks. Before the winter harvest came in springtime, and before the real harvest came in September, in the days and weeks leading up to it, you'd run out of food. Everyone. The noble in his castle, the farmer on his farm, there's no food. So what you try to do is go on short rations, and then when the food runs out, you just try to drink enough water and survive until the harvest comes. The vegetables and fruits are ripening, but they're not ready to be taken yet. So twice a year, everyone goes hungry. If you look at medieval manuscripts, you see the bellies of the people during the hungry time. We've talked about this. Well, when there's a famine, when there's a failure of the crop, when the weather's bad, real starvation kicks in, and starving people are desperate. They strip the lowlands of everything edible. Pets are eaten. Livestock is eaten. Grass is eaten. Shoe leather is eaten. Everything is eaten. And then they go up into the hills and they strip those clear. And human beings, when they're desperate, are pretty good gatherers. So the predators, who are apex predators in the hills, come down. They come down and they discover a strange scent around the man-things. And the scent is a scent of weakness and death. So the wolves get bolder, and they come into human communities. There are stories of peasants so weak with starvation in their huts, just lying there, trying to keep breathing and keep living and survive until the harvest. And they hear wolves outside, and first they're, hey, get out of here, wolves! They bang at the ground, and they make noise, and the wolves go away. But eventually the wolves realize the people are too weak to do anything. And eventually the wolf comes in, and the last time you see good old Uncle Ed is when he's being dragged by the ankle by a wolf out of the house. And nobody has the strength to stop the wolves. This happened. It is the basis for big bad wolf legends. It's the basis for werewolf legends. And it's the sort of thing that natural philosophers in universities would study. The concept of a distinction between magic and science, between soul and body had not yet been drawn. So a lot of medieval science has these mystical, magical, mythological, semi-mythological elements. Now, geographically, this is a little earlier than that. I'm going to show you a Dark Age map. I'm going to walk behind you guys because it's right in the corner. This map was taken from just before the time of the Norman conquest. It's called the Hereford Map. It's right here. And it's a tapestry. It hangs. Now, this is, believe it or not, a world map. First of all, the top is the east. Around the outer edge are the three great oceans. You've got the Atlantic Ocean, the Red Sea, and beyond it, the Indian Ocean. But what's called the edge of the world is the River Ocean. Imagine that the world is disc-shaped and flat, and around the outer edges is water. That's the River Ocean. It surrounds the world. Now, this is also called a T and O map, because the O is the round world, and the T, well, I'll show you. The bottom of the T is the Mediterranean Sea. So this is a map from England. It's got Ireland, it's got Scandinavia up here, it's got Spain and France and Italy sticking out into the Mediterranean. Here's the Mediterranean Sea, the islands of Odysseus, all that. Up here is the Black Sea. In the center of the map is the city of Jerusalem, because that's God's holy city. So Jerusalem is at the heart of the world. Asia is to the north. The Garden of Eden is somewhere in the east. The Red Sea is to the south of Jerusalem. The Nile River is to the south of Jerusalem. To the north of Jerusalem is Russia and Scandinavia. To the northwest is Europe and Britain and Ireland. So Jerusalem is at the center of the world. You got the Black Sea, you have the Mediterranean Sea, that's the T. The T is the Black Sea, Mediterranean Sea, and Nile River. That's the T. The bottom of the T is the Mediterranean Sea. And the O is the area around the edge. The east is at the top, and Jerusalem is in the center. That's a pretty different world from this. So people's understanding of the physical world is different. To them, it made sense that the earth is the center of the universe. The sun and the moon go around us. The planets and comets go around us. The stars are in a solid, unchanging sphere with the light of heaven itself shining through. That's what starlight is. Above our heads, heaven. Beneath our feet, hell. In the bowels of the earth. Separated from light, separated from warmth, separated from God. That is hell. Separation from God. And your soul ascends to heaven, goes through the star holes and out into heaven, join with God, or your soul descends into hell, sucked into the literal bowels of the earth. That's their sense of geography. And it begins to change and grow after that, through the High Middle Ages. But that's the basis. A disc world with Jerusalem as its center. Yes? That's a good question. Purgatory might be, I'm spitballing here, I don't know. That's the answer. Purgatory might be in the upper earth, not quite as deep as hell. Or purgatory might be in the upper airs, the nighttime sky. Not yet ready to leave through the holes of the stars, maybe floating around in the darkness. In the eternal darkness, you follow the night. I don't know. If you actually wanted to find out, write it up, I'd certainly be happy to award extra credit. And that's true for next fall as well. Can't get around to it now. Okay. Medicine. Good. Medicine is based on the theories of Galen. Galen and people like him come up with the notion of the four humors in the body. There's black bile, there's green bile, there's phlegm, and there's blood. Black bile, why do I have trouble saying green? Black bile, green bile, blood, phlegm. Black bile, green bile, flood, phlegm, blam. Ah! Anyway, in a healthy body, Galen, the Roman Pax Romana era natural philosopher, in a healthy body, you've got a good balance between the four humors: black bile, green bile, blood, phlegm. When a person gets sick, it isn't just that a demon has inhabited them. It's that the humors are unbalanced. Maybe there's too much blood, making a person sanguinary, sort of hyper tense or whatever. There were different illnesses connected to each of the four humors. And if you gave certain symptoms, it indicated you have an excess of phlegm, you have an excess of blood, you have an excess of green bile or an excess of black bile. And the way to treat illness is, and this is passed on to barber surgeons and leeches, is to drain out the excess and to eat foods that will give you what you lack. So say you're sanguinary. You have too much blood. You have an overabundance of blood. It's overwhelming the other humors and it's making you sick. Well, then the definite thing to do is to go to a leech. A leech isn't just a little sucky animal. A leech is a doctor that specializes in leechcraft. Sometimes they're a barber surgeon. Sometimes they're not. What the leech does is he will slice a nick into your veins. I think it's the veins. Maybe the arteries. I don't know. Somewhere in your blood system, they'll nick a hole. And they'll take a leech, a hungry little leech, and they'll place it on there to suck out your blood. Maybe they'll have 3 leeches on you at one time. Maybe they'll have 8 leeches on you at one time, and they will bleed you. If they don't have any leeches, maybe they want to see how the blood flows normally, so they'll actually bleed you freely without a leech and let your blood flow and track how much blood comes out, how quickly, and so forth. To them, this made total sense because they have too much blood. To us, what you're doing is you're drawing blood from a patient who's sick, thus weakening them against the sickness. Modern medicine looks with horror on leechcraft, just like it looks with horror on trepanniage. A trepannier is a person who relieves the excess pressure in the head by drilling a hole in the head and the skull to release fluids from the brain pan. Most people didn't survive trepannage, which is this drilling of the hole. But sometimes they did. They'd put a silver plate in your head. You'd walk around for the rest of your life.
Actually, there's this thing called burr holes, and if there's an excess pressure in your head, they drill holes in your skull to release the pressure.
Yeah. What is it called, you say?
Burr holes.
Burr holes.
Don't know why, it's burr holes.
Well, it's also called trepannage, and there were people called trepanniers who would do that. And just think about how scary that is. Even today, the brain is largely a mystery to us. And they're drilling, in ancient Egypt, you have guys, and with, hand, oh, God, no! I mean, some of the stuff doctors did is pretty scary stuff.
That's actually what Jeffrey Dahmer did to his victims.
Ah, you know more about that! Oh, that's horrible! Oh, I'm not surprised, though. He was an evil man. I don't remember. Did they execute him?
I think so.
Good. I hope they did. He's the sort of person that should definitely ride the lightning, in my humble opinion. Although they probably gave him, if they did execute him, lethal injection. Oh, in any event. Oh, too much. Too much. Oh, it's creepy. Now I know how you feel. You come in here, we get ready for lunch, and I'm talking about all these horrible historical things. You've done it to me. You treat me up. So good job. Okay. Another kind of doctor. Yeah.
How, if they were getting worse, would they determine that because the four humans are still out of whack and or torture, I guess, in a way, too? But what happens when the person finally dies? Or how do they determine it?
It was just God's will. It was too much. Too much for us to handle. In the face, if God has determined for a person to die at a particular time, then they're going to die, no matter what we do. We try to help. Believe it or not, these people tried to apply the Hippocratic Oath in a Christian fashion. Remember the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm. They actually thought that putting leeches and bleeding a person was helpful. They really believed that. And they must have believed it because sometimes the person would get better. Now let's imagine you have a fever, or somebody has a fever, not you. I don't want you to be healthy. Somebody has a fever. You decide to treat it with leeches. Now, they may recover naturally. People do recover from fevers naturally. You get enough rest, you take a lot of fluids. Well, you're going to be laying around in leeches, and you are going to drink a lot because you've got to replenish the blood. You've got to replenish other humors. In any case, you can be the victim of leechcraft and still recover. So sometimes they would take credit for a person's natural recovery, right? With trepanage, as again, sometimes people live. Sometimes people were better. For a while, anyway. Sometimes people live long and healthy lives with a silver plate in their hand. I can't explain it. They just did. So, people aren't stupid, even in the superstitious times. There's a reason why they would practice certain traits and certain skills. And they practiced these because they genuinely believed that they thought they were doing good. We don't think that. But I promise you, if and as civilization continues to progress, people will look back at early 21st century medicine with the same horror that you and I may look at leechcraft or at trepanage. People will say, you don't understand. They didn't understand. No, there are things we don't understand, but maybe our successors will.
What kind of?
I don't know. I suspect, actually, that if they're trying to get the blood supply down, they wouldn't feed them things like liver. But they might. I mean, liver is bloody. They would have made the connection between eating liver, a cow's liver or whatever, and a human blood supply. They would have known enough about that, I think. But I don't know. Again, research it. You can do it for a case study or something. Surgeons. Barber surgeons. A person is injured. So you slice away the wounded flesh, you fix what you can, you clean it up, and you stitch it all together. Barber surgeons have the job they have because they're the guys with the razor blades. To keep a razor blade in the Dark Ages and in the High Middle Ages is a lot of work. They're very expensive. You need a really good steel. You need to know how to sharpen it to a literal razor's edge. So barber surgeons use the same gear to cut your hair as they do to slice into patients that they're perpetrating surgery on, performing surgery on. Let's be nice. The key difference between medieval surgery and modern surgery, and this is something Paracelsus is one of the people to begin to ask questions about, is do you ever cut into a healthy person? Do you ever take a knife and slice a healthy person open to try to address a problem inside? And the answer is, yeah, sometimes you do. The problem is, if you do that, the likelihood is the person that you're slicing into will go into shock. Just like they were stabbed, they'll go into shock because you've just cut their belly open. And sometimes that shock is enough to kill them. So opening up a person that's healthy was rarely done. But if it was going to be done, you get the guy with the razors who's good at cutting things. Cutting your hair, cutting your beard, cutting open your intestines to see if everything's okay. Yeah, barber surgeons. So barber surgeons and leeches, surgery and leechcraft. And of course there's exorcism, which we've talked about, the driving away of evil spirits. Exhumations versus the Hippocratic Oath. If you are exhuming bodies to try to make the world a better place, but it's Uncle Ed and Uncle Ed's family or Uncle Paul's family is angry about it, I guess you could say in your defense, but we're trying to help. But that usually isn't enough to assuage the anger of a mob with pitchforks and torches and riot on its mind. Okay. I think the last thing I'll talk about today is the Little Ice Age. The Little Ice Age. This is me, a guy who does not believe in man-made climate change as being the apocalyptic threat that others believe in. Because I know, as a historian, the climate changes all the time. And we are an intelligent species. The idea that we can control the world and freeze the world's climate into the current mold is nonsense. But what we can do is adapt. We can move our cities, we can adapt our technologies, but the thought that if only we had more regulation, we can stop carbon emissions and freeze global climate. No! You can't. You're not God. I'm not God. Government is not God. Oh, God, that's heresy to some people. But I say it again. Government is not God. And I, with all of these ideas about the climate change movement today, am telling you that there was a climate change that shifted history. In the late around the 1200s, the world experienced the beginnings of what was called the Little Ice Age. Why? Because we're in an interglacial period. I love it when scientists go on television talking about how we can cool the climate. No, we're in an interglacial period. Unless we, at some point leave the planet by going into space, sooner or later, a new glacial period will begin, a new ice age. And there will be a mile of ice where we are right now. Because the global currents, the warm water conveyor current that used to flow between North and South America and between Africa and Eurasia have been cut. And that is the fundamental reason for the instability that has created a series of ice ages. And we are in an interglacial period. What will likely happen is the world will warm for a while, and then there'll be a sudden change, and then it'll cool. It was warmer 1,000 years ago than it is today. It was warmer during the High Middle Ages than it is today. We know this. Wine grapes in Scotland, I talked about. But what's coming around the 1200s is a noticeable decrease, a sudden decrease in global temperatures. And this decrease in global temperatures is going to lead to years without a summer. It's going to lead to the Mongol conquests. It's going to lead to the Black Death. It's going to lead to a number of things that happened in the late Middle Ages. Climate change is going to take human civilization like an ant farm and go, by the way, don't ever do that. If you do that, you accrue such bad karma that in the next life you will be the ant in the ant farm with some little kid going, or you'll be like in Finding Nemo, one of the fish being terrified that the dentist's niece is going to bring you home because, so don't do that. I think we'll leave it there. What did you learn in history today? I learned about Finding Nemo. There are worse things to learn. No questions? No comments? Have a good, keep talk among yourselves.